Welcome to the DFS Build NBA edition. I'm Kevin Roberts here to go over the two-game slate at DraftKings for Wednesday, April 24th. Hopefully it won't take too long here. It's obviously just two games, not as much to go over as usual, and we have one ugly game and another less ugly game. Let's start off by saying that this video is sponsored by DFS Hero. If you are in the market for a new lineup optimizer or just want to try something different, you can check out the link below in the video description, and you can get 15% off for giving them a shot. That is what I'm using for the projections for this slate. Actually, I think I'm still on the MLB page, so I'm going to have to go over to NBA. But yeah, give them a shot and see if they help you out a little bit. Also, if this video helps you at all, please give it a like and also consider subscribing so you get alerted to all kinds of videos in the future. As the fantasy football offseason gets cooking, I'll probably end up doing some dynasty and fantasy football season-long stuff. But also we do daily content for MLB, NBA, and then when in season NFL. Might end up doing some UFL at some point too. Just want to get more of a sample size before I dive into that. But right here, right now, we're doing NBA. Let's get it started with the first game of the night, Heat and Celtics. The Heat are massive 14.5-point underdogs, as they should be. This game is a 203.5 total, mostly because the Heat are only projected to score 95 points. Boston obviously can defend pretty well. They're at home. Miami's undermanned. No Jimmy Butler, no Terry Rozier. So, on paper, I get it. Miami is probably going to get their asses kicked, and it's not a good matchup. So we shouldn't have a whole lot of interest in their guys necessarily, but it's a two-game slate. I think we have to consider them. We have to look for ways to get different, and I actually really like the idea of going for, somewhat contrarian Miami Heat guys. I think it starts up top with Bam Adebayo and Tyler Hero. They're coming in with solid projections, 40 fantasy points for Bam, 37 for Tyler Hero. Obviously, neither of them were great in game one. Bam was considerably better, but the peripherals weren't really there. He scored pretty well, but he didn't really, do a whole lot beyond that. I think if you use Bam, he was fine. He didn't hurt you. If you use Hero, that didn't go very well. But I like them both a lot. The usage is there, and the ownership is not. Right now, we're looking at 24% ownership for Bam at DFS Hero, and Tyler Hero is a lot less than that at 15%. If that holds, I love Bam and Hero on the slate quite a bit. And then we go to Jaime Jaquez, decent projection, 5.8K price. He's probably too cheap for the role he has right now. I think he played 36 minutes in game one. He looked good. He's been really good over his last five. Obviously, he's not like the guy Boston is focusing on when they're out there. He's got the green light to shoot and score at will, and he actually does a lot when he's out there. Let's just check real quick. Last game in game one, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, even got a steal. I mean, every game here, he's getting decent rebounds and assists. He's active on the defensive end. He can get some steals, average a steal per game on the year. So the playoffs have not appeared to be too big for him so far. Obviously, there's always the risk that he could kind of come back down to earth and this being his first rodeo in the playoffs. If you believe that is the case, you can consider being underweight or fading just because he is going to be pretty chalky at 32%. I think that Miami Heat value, though, looks pretty good. I'm not that worried, even though they weren't really in the first game. All the main guys played for the most part. If you want to get different and don't have a lot of faith in Jaquez, you can maybe use Caleb Martin as a leverage play. He's coming in at about half the ownership and is $1,000 cheaper for salary. So you can play them together too. I like him just fine. Nikola Jovic is risky, but he's gonna get some run for them for sure. He started the game one, had 10 and 6, 25 minutes. So yeah, I mean he's cheap. He's 4.2K. And I don't really know that he's going to be at risk of like sitting and if it really is a crazy blowout. I think he's one of the guys that you wouldn't have to worry too much about. And obviously DeLon Wright at 3.8K looks really, really good. If we're going to be looking at DeLon Wright getting 25 minutes again off the bench, both him and Haywood Highsmith are definitely viable punts. And then again, coming off the bench, less concern when it comes to the blowout. But for me, I want to go against the grain a little bit. I don't mind eating that value, but I definitely want to prioritize Bam and Hero, not necessarily always together if you're running multiple lineups, but I do want exposure to them being overweight on the field just in case they hang tight or have really good games against Boston. On the other side, Boston, obviously Tatum stands out at 9.5K. He's pushing for 50 fantasy points with a 24% boom rating. The ownership isn't crazy considering he could be the top stud of the slate. 27% for possibly like this slate's Jokic or a Luka. That feels worth targeting. The only problem is if we're actually going to buy into the blowout risk, I mean, it feels like a lot to pay for Tatum on a slate that has a lot of nice mid-range options. And just in general, Boston's healthy and stacked, and he's not going to be the one that wrecks every single game. This could easily be an opportunity where we could say, okay, Tatum is a good play, but he's a little expensive for this slate. We don't really feel like we have to go get a stud on the slate. And then we can go look at Kristaps Porzingis, 7.3K, really nice price, solid projection. He is carrying a lot of ownership at 38%. Jaylen Brown is probably my favorite play for Boston, 7.6K, a little bit quiet in game one, so I anticipate him waking up a little bit in game two here. Derek White looks okay at 6.5. Drew is totally fine at 6. Not really looking at the value here. I think Al Horford at 5, you could do worse. He's still going to get minutes. I think he played 25 minutes off the bench in game one. He's always a double-double threat. He can hit threes. So he's viable. I don't have a problem with that. I just don't think he's like the value that I'm getting to. I do like that he's not very owned, so that's encouraging. But yeah, I'm probably going Jaylen Brown here if I'm prioritizing Boston, and because of the likely blowout, I don't imagine they're going to play the full game. So you can play anybody on the Celtics, but I'm gonna go with Brown as my favorite play. All right, next game we have the Pels and the Thunder. In theory, this is the game of the night, 7.5 point spread, and a 11.5 total. So this is where a lot of the ownership is going because the blowout risk of the first game. People are coming over to the Pels and Thunder. Obviously, you have SGA for OKC, who looks like the top stud of the slate, and then you have the Pels side with no Zion Williamson. Ton of usage opening up. So guys like CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, too cheap. They look awesome. I have no issue with getting to them as chalky mid-range guys. I think that's good chalk. It's kind of like Jamal Murray the other day when he was 7.8K, projected for like 50 fantasy points, but he also projected for 50% ownership. If you would have pivoted from him to Tyrese Maxey, which I actually suggested as a possibility, that would have been very, very good because Maxey doubled his points basically. But Murray was still a really good play. I think you just have to kind of weigh the pros and cons of like good chalk versus bad chalk. I don't think McCollum or Ingram are bad chalk here. I think that's good chalk. Bad chalk might be Trey Murphy, just because he's Trey Murphy and he's like a secondary option on this team. He's not a bad play by any means. At 6.7K, he's getting like 40 minutes right now. It doesn't seem like that's going to change. He's got a nice role. He is lower owned and cheaper than both McCollum and Ingram. But I mean, you can't eat all the chalk. You got to take a stand and do something different. If you don't want to do it with Murphy, JV could be a good spot to do that. I do see the case for JV for sure. Number one, he's not that expensive. He's 5.7K. Number two, they kind of need his size because Chet is in there. Number three, he's a really good points per minute guy. I mean, JV, if he's out there for 25 to 30 minutes, he's probably going to crush his price tag. So in a vacuum, I do like JV quite a bit. Jonas Valanciunas, if you're not sure who JV is. The problem is they do have Larry Nance off the bench. You can always get in foul trouble against Chet, and he's super chalky at 51%. I don't think it's a death sentence at all to eat that chalk, but I do think it's an opportunity to get underway and get a little bit different and maybe pivot to Larry Nance or just find a different guy in that price range that you can use. Like, for instance, right away, right off the bat, for me, I'm putting Bam in my center slot. So right away, Bam has a ceiling and a pretty nice floor, and he's a really good price, and he projects well. And he's not going to be that owned. When you compare Bam to CJ, Ingram, SGA, Tatum, all these other really good plays, he's like the lowest owned one. So I love Bam tonight, and that's like my flag plant for this slate. If Bam's going to be like 20, 25% owned, I'm going to play Bam. So then you're looking at one other spot where you could play JV. So maybe instead of playing JV, you go play Larry or just somebody else in that price range. And then boom, 2 moves, and you're getting completely different from the field without necessarily taking on that much risk, unless JV just goes absolutely bonkers. So you could play JV. He is a good play, but at that ownership, that might be a spot where I look and try to get different. Herbert Jones at 5.1K looks like a totally fine value. I think he's a pretty good leverage play on Trey Murphy, but Trey Murphy is technically the better play. He's just the safer play. I do like Jose Alvarado for value. I like Larry Nance for value. Probably not going down to Najee Marshall, but without Zion there, Najee Marshall is viable. He played 15 minutes in game 1. He does a little bit of everything. He's a decent points per minute guy. So I don't have a problem with him. If you want to go pay up and get like Tatum and SGA and all these studs, you can go punt with like Najee and Jose and, some of these other guys, another value that I'm going to get to in a second, Lou Dort. So you can do that. I'm just probably not going to get to Najee. It feels a little bit too thin for me. Okay, so last team here, we got OKC. Obviously, they're in the best game environment of the night. They're favored to win. They're at home. All of that sounds pretty good. The only problem is this still isn't like a really fast-paced, offensive, exploding game. It's not like neither of these games are really good DFS environments. So this is probably the better one. But just keep in mind, once again, a lot of the ownership is going to flock this way. So I'm going to work to get different. And I think going Bam and Hero right off the bat, paying for those two instead of like the same guys everybody else is paying for is one way to do that. That said, SGA looks awesome. I mean, SGA is underpriced. He was up at like 10.5K all regular season. It is the playoffs. It is not an ideal matchup for setting, but he does have a 27% boom rating. He's pushing for 50 fantasy point projection, and he's too cheap. So if you want to go play SGA or Jason Tatum, you can totally do that. Of the two, I prefer SGA. He's going to be a little bit more owned, but he's $100 cheaper. And I think just based off of their roles on their respective teams, I think he's got a little bit better of a ceiling. Chet at 6.9 is a little bit too cheap. He's going to be very chalky because of his price. He did well in game 1. I would anticipate him doing pretty well again in game 2. I don't think you have to get to Chet. He's not necessarily a core play for me, but it's a very good price. Ditto for Jalen Williams, 6.8K, too cheap. They are both really good plays. The only thing is they're going to be super chalky, and if I'm going Hero, Bam, I can't get them both. So I'm not going to force the issue there. I like them, and I like SGA. I just think for me personally, I'm probably going to be underweight on those guys. If you want to eat a lot of the high-end chalk and get different with your value, then Chet, Jalen, SGA, and like the Pels guys I talked about, all are very good plays. Nothing wrong with them. The guy I do like and don't mind eating the chalk at all would be Lou Dort. 4.5K is a little bit too cheap for a guy who played, let me double check, I think 35 minutes in game 1. He's a 3-and-D guy. He's not going to do a ton while he's out there, but he can hit this. He can hit his threes. He can get some steals. He can get a couple of rebounds or assists as well if he's on. I mean, if he cooks as a scorer, he's just going to absolutely smash. So really like the price, like the minutes. Don't really care that he's chalky at all because there's not really many viable pivots at that price range. So yeah, no qualms about that. Not looking at any of the other value for OKC. I swear every time I tell you not to play Josh Giddey, he goes off. I don't think the minutes are safe enough. I think he only played 20 minutes in game 1. Let me just double check. So he's a little bit expensive if his role is going to be that limited. That said, he's not really going to garner much ownership. He does have an okay projection. I mean, he's coming in at 17% ownership. I would bet on the lower end of that just because 20 minutes in game 1, 5.9K price range, not very reliable, but he's a great points per minute guy. So if you want to get different in that price range and use a guy that's probably going to be pretty low owned and does have a bit of a ceiling, Giddey is okay for tournaments. But yeah, to wrap this up, I mean, I'm just going to go with the Heat. That's just too much usage. The prices are too good. The projections are solid. I like the ceilings on Hero and Bam. And, I don't mind eating like the value chalk kind of across the board. I don't mind eating like if DeLon Wright, if he's going to be chalky, 29% owned, I'm okay with eating that chalk at 3.8K. I also don't think he is an absolute lock just because he's coming off the bench. You just never know what they're going to do with their rotation. They could easily play Hero the whole entire game and, maybe play Duncan Robinson more than DeLon Wright. You just never know. So I would keep that in mind. But yeah, that does it for this breakdown. Hopefully that helps you out a little bit. And if it does, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel so you can get alerted to more videos just like this. All right, well, thanks for tuning in, and good luck.